it's just sort of wow.
Hmm.
They've gone out into the world and they're doing whatever crazy things they're doing. And they all have jobs, and I'm just astonished and so pleased when they move forward and their worlds get bigger and it is really exciting to watch that.
Hmm.
I'm proud of them.
This is the Bad Mothers Podcast, where we dive deep into our maternal urges, or lack thereof. We talk about the mothers we left or who left us, and whether they haunt our own choices about having children. Kate Muir is a women's health expert, investigative journalist, and documentary maker. She created and produced two groundbreaking Channel 4 documentaries on menopause that ignited a massive conversation among women in the UK. Her latest book is How to Have a Magnificent Midlife Crisis, and I met her when she visited my local bookshop. I was intrigued by the content of her book, of course, but the thing that made me want to invite her on the podcast was an offhand remark she made about how she'd been a bad mother for wanting a divorce. In this conversation, Kate discusses her research on the benefits of using hormone replacement therapy and shares her experiences of motherhood from the early days to adulthood. The resources mentioned are all listed in the show notes. Part of having a magnificent midlife crisis has to do with asserting our own needs and desires as women in midlife. And I think there are a lot of similarities between encouraging women to do this, allowing women to decide to be child-free, and of course to go no contact or low contact with a parent if that is the best thing for them. These problems are not necessarily related, but the related cultural norms have historically forced women to put up with things that made them unhappy or worse. So here's my conversation with Kate about what makes a good mother, what made her feel like a bad mother, and how she's come through it all. I hope you enjoy. Thank you, Kate, for agreeing to come on the Bad Mothers podcast. Um, we met at my local bookshop when you were there to promote your new book, How to Have a Magnificent Midlife Crisis. And I asked you to go on the podcast, and when I told you it's called Bad Mothers, you instantly said, "Oh, I'm perfect for that."
Yeah, well, you've got to
Um,
admit it, haven't you?
well, I thought it was very funny, but I think it also showed that you sort of instantly understood the ethos of the show, which is that it seems to me that all mothers think they're doing something wrong,
Yeah.
which I think is tragic. And last season on the podcast, we talked a lot about estrangement. So I think in those cases, yes, the mothers are definitely doing something wrong. But I think generally moms are just doing the best that they can. And there's a spectrum of, minor
Mm,
disappointments to serious harm.
yeah.
But I think ironically, it's the ones who are doing the least damage who are the most concerned and worried and thinking they're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you mentioned in the course of the conversation at the bookshop that you felt guilty about the stress it put on your children when you ended your marriage. So that piqued my interest. The concerns you had for your kids
Mm,
versus what you needed to do for yourself and your own well-being. So can
yeah.
you talk a little bit about what that process was like for you?
I mean, that's a huge question that you could write a whole novel about, couldn't you? But I suppose I've learned about that as I've gone along and I've become more wise about it because I started out sort of really kind of instinctual. And I mean, basically I had got divorced just around 10 years ago. I broke up with my ex-husband and um, I did feel really, really guilty. I felt terrible about not just breaking up, but destroying a family because that family never returns to the shape it was in. And even though you think, oh, they'll come over to my flat and be here a part of the time, and they'll go over to his house and be there part of the time, that's not how it works. You are never that kind of amazing unit that you were that can walk out there and do stuff and has jokes and mops up everything. And we were a good unit, but at a point when, your relationship is 25 years old and you've grown one way and your husband has grown the other way, and we became very different people with very different needs, very different politics. And I just think it wasn't working anymore. And literally, I didn't realize what I'd done till after I'd done it, which is that I walked out of the house like a zombie. I got a flat on my own. My
Mm.
two boys were at university or in gap year, one of them. Um, and my daughter was still 15. And she had a really hard time. She worked incredibly hard at school, did really well in her exams, was absolutely miserable at home. And, I'm not going to talk about exactly what went on, but, she was the one that suffered. And every time I just felt, that was the thing that was absolutely worst for me. And the fact she was angry with me and all the things
Mm.
that children have to go through because they've got to go through that anger of separation. They don't understand the adult reasons why you have
Mm.
left what seems to be a perfectly normal situation, and they don't understand all the kind of undercurrents that you've been living with and have shut up about. And I think, one of the
Mm.
things was I I was not therapy friendly. I did not understand that world. I did not really know what was going on in my subconscious all the time until it burst out like a monster. And I think a lot of us don't know what we're doing till almost our bodies walk out ahead of our minds. And so,
Mm.
yes, there was this huge thing around the children and feeling guilty. They're also having hit that sort of period of damage. Um, they learned some things. Actually, my daughter went into therapy. I eventually took a while and I had some therapy. And I also had brilliant therapy from walking with my friends. And I began to learn more about me as a mum, as a person with a career, as a writer. And my daughter, actually, in the end, has learned a lot about how the human emotions and brains, and she's
Mm.
very advanced on that kind of stuff now. So it was both terrible, but it galvanized us into becoming different people, all of us.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I think one of the things I've been learning about myself is that it wasn't until I was maybe in my 30s that I began to think about my mother as like a human being besides my mother, as a person with other interests and um, a life outside of raising me, which I think is really unfair. And, I wish I could undo that. Is that something that you think your daughter maybe learned through this process at a much younger age than I ever thought about
I
it?
don't know. You'd have to ask her, but we have a really great relationship now. I mean, I feel we have an extraordinary relationship, and I feel a great joy about it almost every day. And she lives in New York, but we talk together on WhatsApp all the time,
Mm.
and we just put on our little screens, and she's making hummus or something. I'm cooking, or I'm cleaning something, or I'm walking the dog, and we just have this little screen on and we kind of wander around doing stuff together. So it's
Mm.
not even we have to have a conversation once a week. It's kind of we hang out for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or
Mhm.
in bed together but separately, and we have these conversations, and they're deeply deeply honest because I've gone through quite a lot and she's gone through quite a lot, and we're very direct with one another. And I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just because we're very alike, but it's a huge gift to me, the aftermath of all the awful stuff we went through. And of course, 50% of us also get divorced, and so many children go through this. And the idea that we don't have a framework, really great books that aren't patronizing, a sophisticated conversation, which is sort of what you're doing, I think, here, about this is really shocking
Mm.
because you really learn from other people's experiences, and it's not experience one or two or three, it's probably experience 10, that is the one that matches yours. And, each member of your family has a different experience. And so I think talking about this is massive. Um, but also, I think I grew up and my daughter grew up in a sort of parallel sort of moment in a way, because I'd just been, I'd just been working and then I got married for 25 years and had three kids and a full-time job. And,
Hmm.
I had never stopped. I'd never stopped to think. And I stopped to think
Hmm.
when it all went wrong. So it was really good for me. It was a time of real raw pain and transformation. Uh,
Yeah.
Definitely.
Do you think one of the other things I've been mulling over is moms spend so much of their lives, or we expect them to be entirely self-sacrificing for one, but they spend so much of their lives focused on, raising up their kids, and it takes up so much of their time and attention that
Mhm.
when the children are old enough to sort of look after themselves, I imagine that can be really difficult for mothers to, sort of find another thing to fill that that void that's left. Do you
Yeah.
think that that was maybe part of what made you start rethinking things and getting to know what you want more?
No, because I was always in a bipolar position with family and work. And I always was had a life inside my head, and I was always usually campaigning on something because one
Mm.
part of me is quite political. So I was campaigning on women in film at that point. Now I campaign more on women's health and menopause and things like that. But it's a very similar kind of feminist trajectory. So there was always that going on. I was always writing books. I was always creating things. I had a job as the chief film critic at the Times when I got divorced. And that was a really full-time, intense job where you had to function at a really high level to make sure you got
Mm.
everything right and knew sort of past bodies of work of film. And, it was quite serious. So I always had a separate non-mum part of my life, but I was quite good at putting it away for periods of time. And I also had wonderful people who looked after my kids. And not, I never worked full time indeed until I became a film critic, but until for probably the first 10, 11 years of my kids' lives, I worked part-time.
Mm.
And but as a writer for the Times, in various places in Washington, in New York, in Paris, and then in London.
Oh, wow.
And so that always continued. So I never felt that kind of, oh my God, I've got an empty nest. The only moment I felt I had an empty nest was when I genuinely did one, and I moved out of the family house and I was living on my own, and I lived on my own for 3 years. And that really was getting to know yourself. Hadn't met myself really, had always been living with a bunch of friends or my husband. And suddenly this was me. Hello, me. Oh dear. You know? Um, but it was also, I would say, a massively creative time where I changed my career and got involved in women's health and I've written three books on women's health in the last 5, yeah,
Yeah.
2021 to 2025, 4 years,
Hmm.
4 or 5 years, I've written three books on women's health. So there's just been enormous outpouring of stuff that I felt that needed to be said. And it felt really important to me. But equally, I love being a mum. And although I wasn't there all the time, I think I got very involved with them in terms of intellectual things and doing mad things. And, I always encouraged my children to take stupid risks. I was always the person who was putting them up in the highest tree to see what they do, or letting them, get on with these things at a very young age and be creative and read a lot. And, you know, I think they had a quite good upbringing in the sense it was very stimulating and very exciting quite often. And we also my husband at that point had a house in Scotland, and we were traveling around the world, and we went back to Scotland for all our holidays in Argyll beside a loch. And basically you could, do what no one does with children nowadays, which is turn them out for the day and let them do
Hmm.
terrible things. And they would take kind of a rackety boat down the burn, which is the word for a river, which is full of rocks. And they'd lie flat in the boat under the kind of trees as they were going down the burn, like riding the rapids. And they'd be
Hmm.
kind of 9 years old or 6 years old or whatever. And they would go swimming. They would just go and do stuff by themselves and make dens. And so they had this alternative, wild, uncontrolled world. And I always felt, in terms of good mothering, the not being there, but just opening the door and providing some lasagna when
Mm.
they came back was actually some of the best bits, we did. And maybe listening to people argue at the lunch table or whatever, also probably good too. So I've never been one of those people who actually knew how many pairs of socks my children had. But I really cared what was going on in their brains and, giving them that space. I think you'd have to really ask them and they'd go, "Oh, no, she's rubbish."
Well, you tapped into so much there because, there have been studies in the past couple of years about how much time mothers, even mothers working full time, spend one-on-one with their children compared to, the so-called good old days in the 60s when they would just turn them out for the day
Mm,
and, they knew to come home when the streetlights came on, that old story. And I think, yeah, we expect so much sort of attention and focused play and play dates and those sorts of
mm,
things now that maybe it is a lot more, it feels like a lot more of a burden on the mom than it was when you could sort of
mm.
have some of your own time and space
Yeah.
and let them go play amongst themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just where I live in North London, and because I've got a dog, I'm always walking through the local little parks. And apart from the area, there's one park that has sort of swings and really good slides in it, and parents take their children very officially there. I have never seen a child playing outside with a group of people, unless they were older children doing drug dealing. Obviously, that's what you get locally, but on bikes or whatever. But I have never seen a child climb a tree. I've never seen them sit around having a chat.
Mhm.
I've just never seen. There's sort of late night drinking. There's sort of vaguely criminal activities. With teenagers like
Mhm.
that. But basically, during the day, the children have gone and they've been taken away somewhere. And I think that's our big problem is that they're not forming these relationships. They're on the phones, obviously, at home, or they're on
Mhm.
the television because their parents are afraid of letting them out. And you just think, what if children went to parks by themselves? Wow. And I'm
Yeah.
sure they do in other places and safer places, but in Camden, not really. No.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to circle back to what you were saying about when you decided to leave. You felt like your body just did it and your mind caught up. And I feel like I went through something similar, although earlier in my life, I had a partner from university through all of my 20s, basically. And we had, a dog and a home together. And
Mm,
it did feel like suddenly one day I felt like it was all wrong. Like it wasn't the right partnership. I wasn't in the right
mm,
career. I wasn't writing, which is what I wanted to be doing. And yeah, just suddenly I ended everything. I got another apartment and just, figured out all of the
yeah.
logistics. And that was in my early 30s. And I think I'm 43 now. So I think you're maybe what, 10 years
I'm
older?
61.
Oh, oh, wow. So maybe almost a full generation older than
Mm,
me. So I'm just thinking about how it's become a big news point lately, the falling birth rate and fewer women deciding to have children or
mm,
waiting until later in life. And I wonder if just the fact that women my age maybe are thinking through those things about what I want, what do I want to achieve in my life,
yeah.
maybe a bit sooner than your generation was, if that is contributing to this
Yeah.
trend of fewer kids.
Yeah. And I think well, it's economics, one, but two, it's
Mm-hmm.
it's really and it's really weighing up, my life versus four people's lives, and do I want to support those people and what do I feel about that? And I mean, I totally get it that you might not want to do that. We didn't sort of think about that at all. It just was I happened to get pregnant and we were really pleased. It just
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
we didn't kind of make any decisions beforehand or anything like that. But I also think with those things, I'm not really sure why all that's happening. You'd have to ask sort of younger women. But my feeling about sort of just taking action and moving out and your body taking action. And I found a card later on, which I keep up on my bookcase, which says, leap before you look. And
Mm,
I think that's fantastic for many, many things. Is just think, can I write a novel? Can I go on this holiday? And that's really quite exciting and dangerous. Can I move out? Can
mhm.
I, sometimes that leaping is what you need to do. And obviously then the net catches you, but you don't know the net is necessarily there or what shape
Right,
the net
right.
will be. And of course the net did catch me, and the net was my friends and also my own resilience and possibly also my own need to be alone. Because when you think about just cooking and making sure there was food for 5 people, even if you've got someone coming in part-time to help you, look after the kids or whatever, but you were just looking at sort of 70 meals a week or whatever, more,
Wow.
almost 100. And you've got to fulfill, vitamins for different people. And sometimes you just think, oh, I don't care about 100 meals a week, and I don't care about anyone else's laundry. And suddenly moving into a flat, I had this moment where I thought, I'm not cooking.
Mm,
And I just brought in really nice soup from the deli and yogurt and,
hmm.
falafels, put it all in the fridge and ate it during the week unless I was going out. And the joy of not cooking and having to care about all that was massive. And
Yeah.
sometimes it just takes up a lot of intellectual space, and I've got lots of other things to think about. And then I would cook. My daughter came around like once a week or at the weekend. I would cook for her, really really cook properly, and that would be it. And cooking would be then a gesture of love as opposed to a gesture of survival. And I do think all those things. I keep a diary also in the shelf back there from, I think, oh God, when my children were like 8, 10, 12 years old. And it's not my diary, it was the family diary. And I look at the entries and it's just covered in writing of what everybody's doing on different days and where they're going, what they're doing, what my
Mm,
husband's doing, what we're all doing. And I just thought, God, I was running that chaos and keeping it controlled. And suddenly you don't really see that if you've just got a phone now. But when it was all written down, the family diary was, wow.
yeah.
And I've just kept it as a relic.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I don't have children. I've never wanted them, but I have had moments like that where I just it's just me and my husband, and we have a puppy now, which has been a challenge. Um, but I have had moments like that where, I have a long day and I just want to go to bed and I go upstairs and forget that I had a pile of laundry to fold. And I've
Mm,
had moments where that happens and I think, how does anybody do this for more than
yeah.
two people?
But I think you run on the kind of heroin of love for
Mm,
years and years and years, and then you have quite a big come down. And I also, one of the things which really, really factored in for me was hormones, quite seriously into my mothering and my desire to be in a family and to be constantly giving, giving, giving
mhm,
love. And I had run out of stuff to give. And at the same time I'd run out of stuff to give, I was around 50 when I left, 51. And basically the loving mummy hormone, the estrogen and the softening hormone, the progesterone, the serotonin, they had all left my body at the
mhm.
same time as my body left and went to live in a flat, because it didn't have any of that left to give, and it had been giving a lot, and I almost think it had drained the source. And obviously, their dad wasn't bad. He just was, he was really busy. He was
Mm,
great. He was nice. He was lovely. He's a lovely guy, but he just wasn't pulling his weight to the extent I was in the household, because I was the woman and I was often able to fit my work around what was going on. And that just builds up and builds up and builds up. And you feel like, do you know what a fatberg is? When all the fat runs down the drains in London into the
oh,
sewers,
yes.
and it hardens like lamb fat or meat fat or
Mm,
butter would harden and block a pipe, and it
mhm.
blocks the whole pipe in the London sewers, so it looks like a small elephant but it's made entirely of white and brown fat.
Disgusting.
Okay, so you can just feel the fat slowly building up in your domestic life, in your
Mm-hmm.
pipes, and suddenly you get stuck. And it really is literally a fat bug, that weight. And you've had these tiny little resentments that you really needed to air every time they came up and flush the pipes out. And I never did. And maybe, I'm quite a difficult person. I don't know. But I would say that my husband and I really both needed to have some kind of therapeutic conversation or therapy all along, because there was a lot going on in
Mm.
his past and his past family life. Um, and his dad died really early on in our relationship, and we looked after his mum. My mum was dying of Alzheimer's. We had huge things that we were holding up as part of
Mm-hmm.
the Fatberg, as well as ourselves, and as well as being kind of a really happy couple around London, going to dinner parties, holding dinner parties, and there you just we just did not acknowledge the emotional weight we were both carrying and the emotional past we were both carrying. And if we had been grown up about that and managed to sort that out, we'd probably still be together as a family.
Mm.
But in some other sense, of course, I don't regret it, because I'm now remarried to a fantastic man, who's a barrister training to become a psychotherapist. So he's had his own
Oh, wow. Yeah.
midlife crisis too. And that's really interesting, to meet someone who's also changing, who's also been through divorce, who also has different priorities in their life. Um, and I really, I like that I'm getting a second shot at this story. We now have 8 children, although they're all grown up. But he came with five, and
Mm-hmm.
actually his son moved into our house, and we had him for 3 years at school.
Mm-hmm.
So I had 3 children, but actually I had a fourth child as well. I had a stepchild. So, but that's been really nice, and he's at university now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the ongoing family, it doesn't end.
I've been thinking a lot while reading your book about all the purposes of these hormones, and you just mentioned how you felt like they'd been drained, and
Mm,
that sort of like urge to care and
mm,
the reward for caring drained
mm,
away too. Um, and I understand the science thanks to your book. Um, but I also worry a little bit about others who might sort of hijack that information and say, "Oh, well, it's just her hormones. It's not really what she is like feeling or thinking."
mm.
And I do that to myself a little bit because, I have ups and downs hormonally, and there will be days where I think, that my husband is the most irritating person on the planet, but I do know logically somewhere in my brain that I don't really think that. It's just how I'm feeling today.
Yeah,
Um, but I also don't want to take that idea so far to where it becomes sort of the joke that men
yeah,
make about women and their hormones
yeah.
and their moods. So how do you square those things?
I totally agree. And I think it's sort of probably, it depends on who it is, but it's probably 70% one thing, 30% the other. And I also think when the hormones go away and we see ourselves clearly in the raw, in the kind of Jungian sense of we're burnt down to the bone, we stand there just in as our raw selves. And then at that point, we look at our shadows and all the things we've repressed and hidden. And then we rebuild ourselves into something new. And that's the sort of dramatic sort of version of it. But you add hormones to that story, and it makes it even more powerful. And I suppose the problem is it's not me, it's my hormones, or vice versa. As women, we've lived since the age of kind of 12 or whatever with our hormones as part of our brains and lives. And of course it is what it is. They are always operating together. And the idea that you separate one off, can be so, so wrong. And I one of the great things about being postmenopause, as I am on really good HRT, including testosterone, is that every day my hormones are exactly the same, unlike you lot under 50. And I get up and I am steady and I know what I'm going to do, and I just feel comfortable. And I don't have any of these ups and downs. And it is massive kind of joy
Mm,
to just not be dealing with those complexities. And I also think that after menopause, back before when you couldn't get HRT, just having no hormones at all, but a steady beginning to the day, at a certain point, once people had gone through the menopausal transition, that also was probably really good in that, people, would be great artists or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or,
mm,
they kept going really, really steadily once they'd overcome, Susan B. Anthony, people like that. They
mhm.
just got on with it after they'd finished with the kids and everything. Um, but so many of us are unhealthy without our hormones. And now that we know that, I mean, for me, it's profoundly important for diabetes, for Alzheimer's, for
Mhm.
osteoporosis. Three things I don't want to get, three things hormones are protecting me from, particularly the Alzheimer's, because my mum died of Alzheimer's. And so, that for me is the optimum way to live.
Mhm.
And it is really important to be at the other side of that transition. And I mean,
Yeah,
it's
with
obviously why we all became witches and, crones and lived on the outside of villages, because we were just sick of the crap.
no, I was astounded by what you shared with us at the bookshop about the prevention of Alzheimer's and
Mm,
osteoporosis. I mean, that is huge. And I'll just ask for myself, and I'm sure for any premenopausal women listening, we can take HRT even before menopause, right, to help even things out when in perimenopause, when hormones are starting to go a little haywire. Isn't that right?
yeah, well, you can sort of track your symptoms and go, well, at 40, I felt like this, but suddenly at 44, why do I have sore joints? Why am I getting the occasional hot flush in the middle of the night? Or why have I suddenly started getting migraine headaches again? And things like the fluctuation of estrogen can. So you probably get a set of symptoms that you recognize, and one of them hugely in perimenopause, the biggest, is a change of mood. There's an increase in anxiety. There's an increase in depression and just sort of low mood, not like clinical depression, but just a sort of flatness,
Hmm.
as the sort of serotonin goes away. And that is really worth thinking about, because now that we know what happens in the body, not just for getting rid of those symptoms, but dealing with the symptoms you can't see, which is particularly osteoporosis, your bone density starts going down in your mid 40s. You're about to go down. Um,
Hmm.
and it goes down about 6% in perimenopause. And then it altogether over the menopausal transition, depending on how much weightlifting you do, etc., or running, it goes down by 10 to 20% around menopause. And that is massive. And that is why people start getting fractures when they're 60. And that's why 1 in 2 women get an osteoporotic fracture. And that's the kind of fracture you just fall over in the kitchen and somehow you've broken your wrist in 3 places,
Hmm.
because the bone is just like glass. Instead of it
Hmm.
bending when it's got lots of hormones in it and it's got lots of density, it's just stiff and it just and
Hmm.
it just shatters. And so it is really worth, and doctors are only learning about this in the UK now, and even worse so in America, um, that you can start taking in sort of, once perimenopause has started, you can get your hormones tested, or you can go on your symptoms alone. And if you've got a set of symptoms, you can say, well, I'd like to top up with a little bit of estrogen, see how it goes, and progesterone as well, which you've got to have if you've got a womb. So those two main hormones. And if that works for you, then you can increase it as time goes on to suit you, because no
Hmm.
hormones are the same. Guess what? And everyone's different. And often in perimenopause, some women just need a bit of progesterone because their estrogen is leaping up and down very erratically. That's why you get these huge flooding periods and then nothing, and then huge flooding periods when you don't expect it. And progesterone protects your womb. It makes you calmer. It sort of can often tone down these heavy, heavy periods. So natural progesterone at that point in your life can really, really help too.
Mm.
You need a good doctor to understand all that, but women are understanding it more and more and getting the information from really good doctors on the web. I mean, like in America, there's Mary Claire Haver. In Britain, there's Dr. Louise Newson. Both superb books, great podcasts, fantastic scientific accuracy, really good. And so women
And yeah, that's so
are
important now.
informing themselves and then going
Yeah.
in with their information and asking for help, which is completely different and is a reflection of the medical establishment's failure to do its homework. And because it's
Mm.
new homework that's just changed over the last 20 years.
Yeah, and I appreciate you naming those doctors too, because there's this void of information. I think there are plenty of charlatans who are telling us things we don't
Right.
need. And so having reliable sources like you and the doctors you mentioned
Mm,
is so helpful.
mm.
Can you tell us, just bringing it back to motherhood a little bit, I think, what was appealing to you about being a mother? It sounds, you said you were really pleased when you found out you were pregnant. Did you always assume you would have children?
Yeah, I think I did. And I was an only child with parents who were quite old. So my mum was 38 and my dad was 46 when they had me. And
Oh.
back then, they were the oldest parents at the school gate by 20 years. My dad certainly was. So I had a very kind of adult childhood, just being dragged along to things with them or whatever. And it was very lonely, just being, an only child. And then I sort of really wanted to have more than one kid, and actually I had three. So I did want to do that. And I know I loved having a baby. I loved playing with a baby. I loved watching their brains grow. And once they had started to kind of I was more like once somebody was 3 or 4 and we could discuss worms and go and dig for carrots in my allotment and just I loved teaching them things and letting them teach me things and doing painting with them or doing digging or cooking, making
Hmm.
terrible cakes with them. And I really enjoyed that engagement with them when they were young, harder when they're teenagers, but I really enjoyed
Hmm.
that. And we enjoyed being a family together, and it was really good for a long while actually. And I mean now it's just very nice. My son is oldest son is 30, my second one is 28, and my daughter's 25. And I just went out for brunch with my two sons and one of the girlfriends, on Sunday in kind of Newington Green, somewhere trendy. And just going out and hanging out with them and the way they talk about politics and the way they talk about the latest trends and the ridiculous baseball hats they have and why are they wearing that? And it's so exciting to be intimately engaged with young people that you can ask questions of and have a real two-way conversation. And they now treat me as kind of a mad child, who does mad things in campaigns. And they are the kind of adults going, "Oh, for God's sake, Mum, why are you doing that?" And but I love that that is where we are now, and that we have a relationship largely of equals, and we've been through a lot together, and we're a lot more honest than we were, and we come
Hmm.
to one another if there are problems. So it has been, that has been great. I really appreciate the way they've had sort of a lot of grace about dealing with everything that's happened.
Hmm. That's such a beautiful, I think, evolution of your family. I mean, you described from when they were babies to adults now, and it sounds wonderful. Um, and I think I get stuck on, for my reasons for not having children are many, but I really get stuck on the baby phase, like pregnancy, and the baby terrifies me.
Mm.
I've always thought the best time for having a child would be like 11, 10, 11, where we could talk about books that they're reading and and cook together, as you said. So like those sorts of things. But I think the big hindrance for me is that's kind of the only appealing stage that I can imagine. And of course, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah,
So,
and a lot of it's just a lot of work and a lot of duty, and
mhm,
in the end, it has been worth it. I love that. I really do. And just watching them, I think one of the big things for me is not, there's the whole business of roots and wings. I'm more pro wings for my kids than worrying too much about the roots. And when you see, I have them on like find my kid on my phone still so I
mhm,
can see where they are. And I look up and I go, oh God, my son's, in Edinburgh at a conference, or he's at COP, the
mhm,
climate change conference. And my other son is in, oh my God, he's in Uzbekistan or somewhere.
mhm,
And my daughter's, oh, she's somewhere in Williamsburg in New York. And it's just sort of wow.
mhm,
They've gone out into the world and they're doing whatever crazy things they're doing. And they all have jobs, and I'm just astonished and so pleased when they move forward and their worlds get bigger, and it is really exciting to watch that.
mhm.
I'm proud of them. So we're quite, oh.
Oh, that's beautiful. I wanted to recommend a book if you haven't read it, Ladder of Years by Ann Tyler.
Oh right, no, I haven't. I don't think I like her work. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And in that story, this woman, I'll just tell you the very beginning so I don't give anything away. This woman I think it's set sort of in maybe the 80s-ish, but she's a mom to some grown children in their 20s, and her husband is a doctor and works full time. And she just feels sort of dismissed by everyone. Everyone ignores her and her family. And they go on a holiday, and she is so irritated by how they treat her. She just walks off, gets a ride into the next town, and finds an apartment and a job and doesn't tell anybody where she went. And I
I get
just
that.
think it's such a brilliant premise, and it sort of
Yeah.
ties in with what we've been talking about in that sort of stage of life when,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I've always been a fan of that kind of bad mothering or radical mothering. And I remember in America, when because I had my first baby, I was pregnant in America, and we ended up flying back to England. But I had the kind of pregnancy and then the baby in New York. And the book everyone read was What to Expect When You're Expecting. An incredibly dull, dictatorial book, really, really thick, like the
Mm-hmm.
10 volumes of Shakespeare or something. And if you ate a chocolate biscuit, your baby was basically going to, be ill for life. It was
Mm-hmm.
like every bit of food. It was just like so detailed and so kind of just unjoyous and so perfect. And then at the same time, I found another book called Operating Instructions, a journal of my son's first year by Annie Lamott. And Annie
Oh.
Lamott is a bad mother in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
And she just wrote about it so honestly, so directly, all the things that went wrong. And I remember her writing about that post-pregnancy moment when she was lying in bed. She got the baby and she absolutely shattered. And I think she was naked and she looked down and her stomach, her deflated stomach, like a bag, was lying on the bed beside her. And she said, like a puppy.
Mm-hmm.
There's the idea of what you go through. You're deflated. There's this thing, and you think, oh, it looks like a puppy lying beside me. I've got my, but just being courageous through, the war of motherhood. I loved that. I thought, yes. And there was
Mm-hmm.
another book called I Know, I Know How the Blue Jay Sings, or What the Blue Jay, that was also really, really good. And they were American women who were kind of honest about their birth
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to kind of perfect, which I think was,
Yeah.
was important to have read those books at that time, um, and kind of be supported by them. It was
Mm-hmm.
Louise Erdrich that she wrote a birth book, and I think it was called I Know Why I Know How the Blue Jay Sings, and that was all
Okay.
really
Okay.
good about birth and nature and fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
And they must have been rare at that time to
yeah,
have books that were really honest about motherhood. I think we're doing better now.
yeah. Yeah, well, I'm sure there's lots of funny books on there that
Mm.
are, but it's not always funny.
Well, thank you so much. That was a great conversation. I'm so glad we got to talk about it. And yeah, I think I haven't read your other books yet, but I love the How to Have a Magnificent Midlife Crisis, and I
Yeah.
love the idea of owning that, as you
Oh yeah.
said, rather than making it out that it's something bad that happens to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we're going to live so long if we're all going to live till we're 90 or whatever, roughly. Halfway through, we all need to take stock and make our lives better in one way or the other, or change them
Hmm.
just so we don't get bored. And I also think you're allowed to have a midlife crisis earlier than 50. It doesn't have to coincide with your menopause or anything, but you can have one at 38 or 62. That is
Hmm.
acceptable as well. You can have a series of them, I think. Well, it's important. I think it's nice to have, you need the crisis to almost kick you into the next world and the next thing
Right.
you're going to do. And if you can use the pain to make change, then, it's not great, but it's better.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you.
Bad Mothers is written, produced, and edited by me, Monica Cardenas. I'd love it if you'd rate and review the show and get in touch with any feedback. You can find me on my Substack, and guess what? It's called Bad Mothers too.